Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, April 3rd. I'm Jay Rosenthal, co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of Cultivated Live. And you are Jeremy Burke. You are the other
That's
co-founder,
right.
but also the editor-in-chief. Jeremy, nice to see you on this Wednesday.
Always a pleasure, Jay. I like my Wednesday mornings.
I like my Wednesday mornings too. We're going to get into the news, and it's a lot about big banks and big states. That's sort of the theme of the day. But also just to, like, you've been covering the industry for a long time. And I've been
Yeah.
in the industry for a long time. Like, it seems like bigger things are happening on a more regular basis now than maybe ever before.
Yes. I mean, in terms of the US, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's not a drip, drip, drip. Like we use the term drumbeat a lot. It's getting louder and louder. It's exciting. I mean, I'm hopeful that these things work out and that we're the rug isn't pulled from under us as we've experienced before. But yeah, it's exciting times. It's
Yeah.
fun to cover for sure.
It is fun to cover. Let's start with big banks if we could. And this is a big deal because, well, we always talk about banking in terms of safer banking, access to banking. But when the Wall Street Journal covers it, it seems like it gets elevated because now other people are paying attention. So a new Wall Street
Yeah.
Journal report goes into just how difficult the status quo is for cannabis operators and how helpful federal reform, like moving cannabis to Schedule 3 or the Safer Banking Act, would be to the industry. And you and I know this, but like some of the bigger banks, especially the ones that deal with lots of MasterCard and Visa, are not really in the industry. So it limits itself to smaller credit unions and local banks to take the risk, if you will, of banking cannabis companies. And so this was obviously a big story, and there were some important people quoted in the story. And then there was some backlash online from
Yeah.
the likes of Tyler Bearline from Safe Harbor Financial, saying the existing system is a losing proposition on every single level. It makes no sense at all. He also was sort of, sorry, that was Jeff Markley, sorry. But
Yeah.
others were chiming in. He was actually saying that cannabis banking climate has gotten so competitive that many banks and credit unions have either exited the business or are in the process of doing so. He's in it, so he's seeing the other side of it. So there's lots going on with this story. I don't know if they missed the mark,
Yeah.
but maybe there's more to it.
Yeah, look, I mean, let's be balanced here. I don't think they missed the mark, right? Like these banking issues are absolutely very real. In the lead of the story, they talk about these private security contractors who are basically rolling around with 400 grand. One of them staying awake in a hotel room with the bag of cash, right? Like this is how cannabis companies are doing business in 2024. That being said, right, like these cannabis companies have contended with banking issues for a long time. There are a lot of credit unions that are doing business with the industry that aren't rug pulling, so to speak, at the last minute because they are going in with eyes wide open. They do have relatively sophisticated compliance teams. So that's what the pushback was about the story. All that being said, right, like it's true that the cannabis industry has banking issues. It's absolutely true that we need federal reform to help these companies do business and not just opening a checking account, but in terms of startup loans, right? Like the only rates that cannabis companies can get lent at are basically usurious. The other piece is like big federally chartered investment banks, broker dealers, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, like they're not going to take cannabis companies public because they're violating the Controlled Substances Act. Like that is a huge way and a huge source of capital that companies can grow that just aren't available right now. So yes, checking accounts exist. Yes, some cannabis companies are successful getting loans, but no, it's very difficult for them to get real broker dealer services. The plumbing of the financial system is still mostly unavailable to cannabis companies. And I think the story got that right.
Yeah, I think so too. It brings to mind, I would say, three things. One, in the States, especially, like you can't really buy, it's difficult or challenging or spotty to buy cannabis with a credit card, for example. So that's like one thing. Two,
Payments, right, exactly.
brings to mind there was an episode or a series of episodes of Billions, which talked just about this, where Axe wanted to start a bank and actually
Yes.
bank cannabis companies. It was a very of the moment type of episode a couple years ago. And third, even when there's federal legalization, like in Canada, banking the cannabis industry is done, but it is very expensive, even for legitimate dispensaries or cannabis retailers or cannabis producers or manufacturers, processors, to bank. And so even if all these reforms pass, and goodness, I hope they do, and I think it will open up a great deal, there will still be this taint is probably the wrong word, but it will be seen as a risk, just like casinos are a risk, just like check cashing operations are a risk. Like these things will still exist for banks in their mind as they deal in cannabis.
Yeah.
So there's not a switch that's going to be turned on. It will be a slow roll to normalization, I think.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've written about this before in my old job too. I mean, these banks, big banks, are relatively sophisticated, or they're very sophisticated, not relatively sophisticated, right? Like, it's not just because it's legal they're going to get in the industry. Like, they're making their own risk calculus. The juice has to be worth the squeeze. There is stigma attached to it. There is extra compliance cost that goes into it, and so the industry has to be in a good place for these big banks to want to even play in the sandbox in the first place. But it is true, right, that like a lot of these cannabis companies, like I do want to, with all due respect to Tyler's point and others that have reached out, to our inbox, that like it is true that the cannabis banking climate is very competitive. It is true that there are a lot of credit unions that are ready, willing, and able to service your business. It's just not true that you have TD Bank and Bank of America ready to do that as well.
I think we put up a Wells Fargo a photograph in the story today. Can we move on from big banks to big states? Because there's
Yeah.
two of the biggest stories this week for sure. One is Florida, obviously, with the announcement on Monday that the state Supreme Court is going to let the ballot measure go forward in November alongside a abortion protection bill that will go as well. So important political implications. But we also have a quote
Yep.
from BNN Bloomberg yesterday. The Trulieve CEO Kim Rivers said, "We never take anything for granted here in the state of Florida, but the polling is showing it's a bipartisan issue that cuts across a lot of different demographics. We feel confident that Floridians are ready." I agree with her. We shall see in November, and frankly, how much Trulieve continues to put into the campaign. But I think it's 60% to pass. But Florida is going to be the biggest state to at least have a vote on this that's not named Texas, and one of the big outstanding states to go legal. What are you thinking about when you're thinking about Florida? As we know, this week they're going to a ballot in November.
I think the 60% passage is pretty critical here, right? Like, in the interview, like Kim Rivers, truly, for context, is sort of leading this campaign to legalize in Florida. She notes that medical cannabis in Florida passed with 70%, right? Oftentimes you see support for recreational adult use coming in lower than medical. Sure, there's 10% of wiggle room, but that's a tight margin, right? Like I would be not a good better if I bet on it to pass. That being said, right, like the polling is consistent, it's consistent over time. So I do think there is a good chance, but again, like this could go either way. And I think the dynamics of it coming in a presidential year throw a lot of curveballs, right? Like it's appearing on the ballot with abortion, which, as we saw in Ohio, could probably put some wind in the sails. Those two issues seem to track pretty closely. But Florida is different than Ohio. The dynamics of Trump being on the ballot will change everything. So look, I don't know. I think the chances are pretty good. And I think, look, like to your point, Florida is a very big state. It's a very sophisticated economy. And it'll be very, very good for the industry and especially Trulieve itself if it goes.
And it'll make going to visit my folks down in Florida. Not that cannabis is hard to get down there. There are a lot of. I think there's
A bit
800,000
more
patients.
tolerable. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's 800,000 patients in Florida alone. Like it's a massive medical market, which does bode well for a flip on to recreational market, especially the way they're going to do it, which allows for medical providers, which by the way are all vertically integrated to actually ramp up and get ready for at some point the passage, but also legalization day. Yeah,
Yeah, look, like I think if any state that is purple, I guess you could call Florida, more red than purple, is going to switch. It's going to be Florida, right?
yeah.
Senior citizens love medical cannabis. They probably want to get it easier. There are enough Democrats in South Florida that want this. And look, like there are enough Republicans that I think see the big business sort of more free market enterprise argument here as well. But again, that's all my speculation. We're going to find out in November.
Right, even if the Governor DeSantis doesn't like the smell and is worried about what hotels will be like.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll say on that, right? Like he's a sort of Christian conservative. Obviously, he's going to come out against it. I don't know what conversations he's having in the background. You know, does he have the same opposition that Virginia's governor does? I don't know. But you know, you're not starting from a good place when his first reaction to it is, "Oh, it smells bad." That's not a very thoughtful, well-considered argument. So,
Well,
yeah.
neither was his presidential campaign. Okay, let's move from Florida to New York, where the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act is celebrating its 3-year anniversary this week. You wrote about it today. Now it becomes at a interesting time, fortuitous. I don't know. Interesting time
Sure.
where there's like a deep dive review of the OCM. There's one senior leader who's on administrative leave, another one left last week. Like, is this, and we talked about it last week, like, are we at a turning point in New York hopefully. Like it's very difficult to tell, but things seem to be unsettled, but maybe on the upswing. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I want to try and maybe take a glass half full approach to New York here, which we haven't done in a while. Collecting my thoughts about that. So, look, like stores are opening every day. The governor is demanding action, and like when she is going to demand results, like she is the governor. There is a bit of a bully pulpit there. You're already seeing staffing changes, which is a sign in these sort of regulatory agencies that things are changing. So, look, like yes, I do think we may be on the beginning of an upswing. I think the realization that things have not gone well, and publicly stating that from the governor's office is probably the best sign we have of that. But again, like the results are the results. We need more stores open. We need more consumer access, and we'll see if that ramps up very quickly. Then credit where credit is due. If that is all just lip service, we're going to be in the same boat in another 3 years.
Let's hope not, because by then Florida will have legalized. New York will be this outlier that can't get their stuff together. But we shall see. But I expect, and maybe I'll get into the prediction business. I expect more on this front, especially as it relates to OCM, because I think
Yeah,
dominoes are about to fall there with the sort of deep dive review with as headed as kicked off by the governor and led by someone from the Office of General Services, I guess. So they're doing a deep dive.
yeah.
We shall see. Um,
Yeah, and these reviews take 30 days, right? Or at least 30 days. And so I think we'll know at the end of the 30-day period, like whether wholesale changes are coming or whether they're just going to sort of tinker behind the scenes and make things, a little bit more efficient
palatable.
than they
Yeah.
have been.
Well, we will see, and certainly we will write about it. We'll talk about it. We'll have people on to talk about it as well. I want to go to not from a big state, but to a pretty small state, very far away from New York, and that is Hawaii. It looks like
Yeah.
legalization bill will not move forward in Hawaii, at least right now, because of disagreements over implementation. Like it just seems like they can't get out of their own way in Hawaii. I'm not that familiar with Hawaiian politics, but it seems like they have trouble getting out of their own way as it relates to this issue because it's been talked about for a very long time there.
Yeah. Likewise, I'm not as familiar with wide politics, a little bit
But
farther from New
if someone
York,
wants to send us
but
to do a deep dive, let's go.
I'm there. But look, no, I think from the cursory understanding I have of the issue, right? Law enforcement officials came out hard against it, even though legalization did pass the Senate. Hawaii has other issues going on right now, and implementing legalization is very challenging, as you can see from the New York example. They're still recovering from the Maui wildfires. There's other sort of fiscal issues within the state. And I think they were sort of listening to the law enforcement arguments from some of the teachers. Whether those arguments have merit or not is not really for me to say right now. I wasn't listening to them fully, but um, I think they're a little bit spooked, and I think that they need to clear some stuff off their plate in order to get back into it. Look, Hawaii is a blue state. Like, I think, I don't like to predict, but I think it will happen there. It's just going to be slow.
Yeah, that sounds right. Speaking of slow, and there's some ominous things coming out of Canada. Ominous. There was a story today, but sort of about Sundial, but in particular Indiva it sounds like shopping themselves around, sort of,
Yeah.
but also Heritage Cannabis, a well-known brand, lots of brands on the shelves here, also just filed for creditor protection. It'll be in tomorrow's newsletter. There are some real challenges that I think about. I mean, there have been real challenges in Canada, which could be a lesson to everybody. Some of it, which is actually paying excise taxes back to the government, which is a big burden on companies, and many of them just won't be able to do that. But I feel like there are shoes dropping in Canada that will be a lesson to everybody about how to actually set up a sustainable business in a heavily regulated market. And I think shoes are dropping in Canada faster than maybe that we've been covering or others have been covering.
Yeah, no, I think the one important thing to look at in Canada, and I think this is an issue that gets often debated on social media, right, is when you read the Canadian government's intent about legalizing cannabis, right? It was not to set up a new industry. It was to reduce teen use. It was for public health outcomes. Doing business in an environment where the regulation is set up for a public health outcome is very, very difficult. So, look, like I think, the Canadian government, provincial governments do not want to expand use. They do not want this product to be cheaper. At the same time, they need sort of, fiscally viable cannabis companies. But I imagine that what regulators want is a little bit smaller than the industry looks right now and a little bit less I mean, even less sort of consumer friendly, right? With the packaging restrictions and all that. Canada is a hard place to do business. And I think it's unsurprising to me that this was the outcome when you read the letter of the intent, right? Because, we read about this a lot. Cannabis policy reflects, the political priorities of the people that write it. And so when that's public health, it's going to be hard to do business. That's very much in opposition to Florida, which you can see, and we will see probably in the next couple of years how that shakes out.
Yeah, there's also a story coming out of Canada, Ontario in particular, about local and provincial governments cracking down on First Nations exercising their sovereign right, or at least their supposed sovereign right, to open dispensaries in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. There was a pretty jarring story in the Star about sort of the crackdown that started, but also some pushback to it. So we will see what happens there. I will say that outside of the store in my neighborhood, that is such a store, I get asked by teenagers all the time to go in and buy weed. So I say no, but that is where, if you wanted to buy weed as a teenager, that is where you would go in my neighborhood and find someone to buy it for you. So that's my anecdotal advice. It's my anecdotes in Toronto. Jeremy, anything you'll be looking out for this week? The next time we talk, will there be DEA rescheduling?
Look, I'd love for that to be the case. My job would be interesting. Probably not. But no. I'm paying a lot of attention to federal policy right now. I mean, I'm studying these things really closely. I try not to hang on every word and utterance that politicians make, but right now it's pretty crucial for the beat. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
And we get closer to this, which would be amazing, by the way, if the DEA decided around 420 to do something like this. But we're a couple weeks away from 420, so we'll certainly see the industry ramping up for that date, which is a Saturday this year, which is I'm sure retailers are trying to figure out how to staff up for the days leading up and that actual day. So good luck to all of you retailers. Jeremy, we will connect with you next Wednesday. I mean, you and I will connect, but we'll connect you on this show next Wednesday on Cultivated Live. You can find our newsletter and subscribe there at cultivated.news. It's also on Jeremy's shirt. Subscribe, follow us on LinkedIn. So smash the subscribe button on YouTube. I'll be back here tomorrow with Krista Raymer talking cannabis retail and maybe getting ready for 420, but actually probably better yet, what happens after 420 in a shop. Again, follow us on LinkedIn, smash the subscribe button on YouTube, buy cannabis at your local dispensary. That's super helpful. Jeremy, thank you so much. And we will connect with you next Wednesday.
Always a pleasure, Jay.
Awesome.